Hello and welcome to the FLT Mag and the IELTS interview project through the FLT Mag. I'm Jeff Samuels, and I'm joined today by Randall Sadler from the University of Illinois, Tricia Thrasher from Immerse, and Regina Kaplan-Rakowski, who is from the University of North Texas. And we're going to talk today about augmented reality and virtual reality. So since we've got three expert panelists and a lot to talk about, I'm going to ask them to just begin by introducing themselves, a little bit about your careers and your background and so forth, and then we'll get into a little discussion. So Regina, would you like to start?
Sure. So thank you for pronouncing my name right. It doesn't happen very often. So I'm an assistant professor at the University of North Texas at Learning Technologies. And basically my main interests are at the intersection of three areas: immersive learning environments, such as VR, for example, computer-assisted language learning, and emotional responses to learning technologies. My interest, I would say, started over 10 years ago with the Second Life, and I have to bow to Randy Sadler for having a big impact on my interests in that regard. And back then, Randy and several of other scholars in the field, including Dr. Thibault, we basically explored Second Life for language learning, and later it's basically evolved to something else. And right now we are focusing on virtual reality as far as immersive virtual reality. So that's more or less about me.
Okay, wonderful. Randy, would you like to go next?
Sure. As you mentioned, I am a professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and in a pretty similar way to Regina, my interests are immersive realities overall, ranging from lower immersion ones like virtual worlds, like Second Life. I just double checked. When did I start in Second Life? I think it was like 2005. So I started shortly after it opened up in there, and I still do some things in there today, but my interests currently are more on the VR side, the AR side of things. And myself and Tricia have several potential research projects this this semester that we're trying to figure out.
Oh, sounds great. I hope we'll get into some of the discussion about those and their implications. Tricia, since you were called out, so if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, and thank you for pronouncing my name as correctly as well. A lot of times people mess it up too. So I am the research manager at Immerse, which is a VR language learning company that does like live language teaching and learning in VR. But I just finished my PhD at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I got interested in VR actually through Randy's course, so I have to give him credit as well. The first semester of my PhD, I took his language learning and technology course. And so we went to the VR lab, and that was like my first time ever experiencing it. And then after that, I just started doing any research I could on it. My interests are primarily on using VR to look at affective factors like anxiety. So similar to Regina, and then also looking at how we can use virtual reality to improve oral language skills and proficiency.
Great. So, it occurs to me there's a question that I should have thought of this before now, but just very quickly, how do we differentiate between augmented reality and virtual reality? What is the key differentiator? I'll tell you what I think it is, and you guys then please correct me if I'm wrong or augmented if I'm fall short. But essentially, the way I see it is augmented reality is something like you're looking, you're on your phone or you're using glasses or whatever, and you're still seeing what is around you, and then there are things that pop up or things that you can access or click on and so forth. Walking through a museum and something pops up about the artist and so forth. You still see the artwork, you still see the landmarks, you still see people, you still see places, but you see all this additional information. Whereas virtual reality is entirely immersed. Is that essentially it?
You passed the test, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, Regina talks about that a lot in a couple articles. So
Yeah.
That's right. But whatever Jeffrey said is right. I would just add maybe that virtual reality, it's kind of an easy way to remember that you basically have to have goggles on your
Yeah.
face.
You have to have like
And
buddies.
so that for the full immersion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
VR is the one where if you're seated, you're more likely to bruise your knees because you rotate, you forget your desk is sitting there and you smack into it. Voice of experience.
That's a good way to think of it. So, maybe take a little, some more precautions. Okay. Okay.
Versus the other one I call the help me Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Right. Right. You can still see everything around. Yeah. Okay. So, it's a fascinating topic, and I think a lot of the folks watching this interview probably range in levels of I'm just interested in this, don't know where to start, to I've played around with this and I want to hear what the latest and greatest is. So let's start with addressing the folks who might be on the more new end of things. What advice would you give a language educator who's interested in this, but is just starting out? What should they try first? Is there something they should purchase? Google Glasses or whatever. Where to start? And we could just kind of go around. I don't need to call on you, but I can do that. Randall, you lit up for a second, so it seems like you might have wanted to say something.
Well, I mean, we don't get any money from them, but Trish and I are using the Oculus Quest 2, right? In the research we're doing. I mean, that's far and away the most popular one right now, partly because Oculus, or now Meta, for some time was actually selling these at a loss. Then they just raised the price, so they're not selling them at a loss anymore, but they're still, in terms of the options for a higher quality VR, some of the most reasonably priced. So, I mean, there's no doubt. I would guess Tricia and Regina would agree that the buy-in, depending on how many people you're working with, is not the cheapest thing in the world. I mean, people used to recommend Google Cardboard, but it's not really done so much anymore. I don't think it's supported anymore.
Yeah. One thing I'll say about the buy-in that I feel like people get a little hung up on is you don't need to buy, 15 headsets when you get started. Like you could start out with 2, 3. I mean, you would have to get creative on how to rotate them between the students, but I would actually caution against buying a full set unless your university or school just really wants to, because I bought a full set of Oculus Go's for a research study, 2 or 3 years ago that are essentially obsolete now. Regina and I are going to try to find something that we can do with them, but the technology, it just gets outdated so quickly, and those were $300 a piece at the time. So you do the math, it's really expensive. So yeah, I would recommend getting like 1, 2, 3 to start, and then going from there.
Yes, and to add to that, I thought instead of giving advice of how to start, I would give advice how not to start. And which goes along with what Randy and Tricia said. Do not stop with cardboard, basically. A lot of people just try Google Cardboard for the first time, and they absolutely dislike it. We know why, but they get immediately biased. Oh, VR is horrible, I will get sick, right? That I heard that many times. And they do not even want to try something more, more substantial, something like Oculus Quest, which is way better, and there is no reason to claim that it really will make you feel sick. And so that's one advice: not to stop with Google Cardboard, and also do not do roller coaster experience. Don't start with that, because that's what most people showcase. They want to show the potential of VR, and they basically bias people for the rest of their lives. And that's not fair, because there are so many more different really cool things that do not have to they still show the potential of VR, but without making people basically biased for the rest of their lives. So, and try everything that is available. When you go to conferences, there's always someone that has something to try. Like last Calico, we had Tricia and Randall. They had a whole table and people were coming in and trying, but some people were like, no. Say, why not? Oh, because I know I'll get sick. It's like, how do you know if you don't try? But again, that bias comes back every single time. So it's good to be, explore things whenever you have a possibility before you make an investment, as Tricia said.
Google Cardboard, I couldn't stay in there more than 5 minutes. and I'd be motion sick. But Tricia and I were teaching for like an hour in these headsets and did fine.
I think one other thing to note too is once you have the headsets, allow for training time, like substantial training time. That's where I've seen like some people really go wrong is they think they can just bring it into their classroom and they can integrate it, throughout the entire semester and it's going to work seamlessly. Like I would start really small, with 1 or 2 lessons and give yourself and the students time to train because it's not always super intuitive for everyone.
Yeah.
So kind of related to this, as I want to get into some of the software, the apps, lessons and learning units that people have created that's out there. But before that, just in terms of getting used to the actual, not just the physical aspect of putting this thing on, being used to wearing it and then moving about. But what about the whole idea from a learning perspective that how much heavy lifting is there, I guess is what I'm asking, right? How much to get learners and your colleagues also to the point where they're comfortable with it and that they are not focused on the technology and begin to focus on the learning and the tasks at hand, and so you can achieve those learning outcomes.
Well, I mean, Oculus, for example, it has built-in tutorials. So when you first log in, it guides you through and gives you practice. What do the different buttons do? How do you move? How do you do these different things? Some of the different apps deal with things in slightly different ways, but the tutorials are pretty good for getting their virtual feet wet, at least.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the app too. Like Randy said, some of them are, they all work a little differently and some are easier to navigate than others. And some of them have tutorials built in as well, like separate from the Oculus tutorials. So it's kind of a tricky question because it depends on, what app are you using? How much training time do you need? In my experience, I feel like 2 class sessions, like 50 minutes long, that's what I was dealing with, is like the sweet spot. I felt like 1 hour was a little too short. 2 hours was just right to be able to give them enough time to then when they come back to it, they can navigate it easily. And I think that's what we did with our students in Spain too.
I think so. I mean, the idea being, of course, that so that they can focus on the interaction and the learning, not, oh my, how do I get out of this tree? That happens in Second Life occasionally.
Yeah, that I didn't want to, pick on any one particular thing, but I remember with Second Life, it just seemed like there was so much of getting lost and figuring out how to get around and what was happening in front of you that you couldn't focus on, the virtual presentation that everybody was gathering to see.
Right.
You were trying to get to it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, getting into some of the solutions. So, leaving aside the hardware for a second. So there's so much out there. We'll take advantage of Tricia, who's working on the front lines of this and who's in a venture now. There's so many, commercial ones out there. There's a lot of homegrown. I've seen presentations at conferences that people have done abroad, and we had an interview with someone who has another startup. And so if you're watching this recording on the FLT Mag page, just go back a couple, look for our interview that featured Scott Cardwell. But what are some of
Immerse Me, right?
Immerse Me, right?
Yeah.
Not to be confused with Immerse, which is Tricia and today. But so what are some of your go-to apps or sites? Are there repositories? So again, thinking about the folks that want to get started, and if there's some that are particularly noteworthy for particular target languages, maybe mention those as well.
Tricia, shameless self-promotion.
Yeah, I can do
I
shameless plug for Immerse. I actually became the research manager because I was a research partner before. So I really, really liked their platform and what they were doing. But that's a great one for synchronous practice. It really is like real-time teacher to student, student to student interaction. So it's not really appropriate if you want your student to go in and kind of practice something on their own. They are building out those features slowly and surely, but it was designed for like synchronous work.
It started with English, but what
It
languages?
started with English. Now they have a program for Spanish. And then they're going to be expanding over time as the user base grows. But I think the next one will be Japanese or French. One of those will come before the other, but those are kind of next up. I do really like Immerse Me for asynchronous stuff. Like if you want someone just practice on their own at home, I like their app a lot more than, I don't want to call anyone out, but then some others, because they do have, the realistic 360 videos that have
Mhm.
cultural
This too.
elements. And then I'm trying to think our other go-tos. I mean, we use Spatial a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. AltSpace is kind of like the wild, wild west, but they do have a language exchange.
Right.
Like
Oh,
your
VR
students-
chat is the real Wild West.
Yeah. I will say though, I wouldn't reinvent the wheel. Like I feel like when I got started with VR, I felt like I had to build a VR experience.
Yeah.
And I don't have the background at all to do that. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of available things.
So any other particular ones? We talked about some that were for some of the languages. I'm curious, for example, oftentimes the lictals either get left behind or they're leading the charge because there's nothing for them, so they create it. So I'm just curious.
Yeah. I mean, I would say a couple things. First, when I think of those two immerses, Immerse and Immerse Me, Immerse Me, human to computer interaction via VR, which certainly has a good place and is great. And then Immerse, human to human interaction via VR, which is great because you have two different ways of interacting, and as you can imagine, those both have their own strengths and weaknesses. So sometimes a combo like that, I think, could be quite effective. And then Tricia mentioned we've also been using one, and we're thinking about using one for a future project called Spatial. Spatial started out kind of just before the pandemic hit, and it was going to be for business, right? So it's like, oh, you can have a conference room and everyone can join via VR. And I think they realized that wasn't probably going to work business model wise. They really opened it up a lot. So we just visited the other day. Now people can bring in their own environments into Spatial. So we just visited a really cool art gallery set up by some users from Japan. So when I popped in there for the first time, there were three people from Japan, and they're talking to each other as they were setting up this gallery. So again, for me, because I'm very interested in telecollaboration, giving places where students might be able to collaborate in VR with other students or other language learning. And things are getting quite interesting that way, I think.
Okay.
So I can add a little bit to that. Of course, I agree with everything Randy and Tricia said. But in addition to Immerse Me and Immersed, which I both, again, think that they are really great platforms and they do different things, so that they are not competitors, they are more like they complement each other. But there are other, especially for ESL teachers, everything is in English, really, right? In VR. So it doesn't have to be a specific app for language learning. It can be any type of experience as long as it's in English, and most of them are. And within even those ones in English, there are sometimes settings you can change and have Spanish or Japanese, whatever else. That it basically it's up to the teachers to go and explore. It doesn't have to be a commercial app. Actually, lots of them are free. And also there are spaces, I think we haven't mentioned yet, via VTime, for example. It's one of my most favorite. I know Tricia did her dissertation in that space. And it's a wonderful space, for example, for social interactions again, right? So we can use the language. So there's also Mondly, which I will probably not comment too much besides saying that it still probably needs some work with speech recognition. And yeah, there are some other ones. I think Tricia and Randy did like an overview of all of them, so they can probably provide a great list.
Wander VR is a good one too. That's essentially Google Earth meets VR, so it can be really useful if you're wanting students to do like tours of cities. It's not free, but it's $10, so it's more affordable than some. And then Alcove is also kind of an interesting space. It's like a home that students can be in there together and watch videos. They can, put up different pictures, play games. We did some work in that one. Um, and yeah, I mean, the one that Regina, that you were doing that study in is a good example of one that's not for language learning, but it's in English.
Let me just interject to say that I'm imagining the folks watching this are scribbling down everything that you're mentioning and trying to capture it. And we'll be talking about resources that are out there that have cataloged and listed what is available currently. So we'll provide some guidance on that, so you don't have to try to go back and pause and play and figure out what we're saying. One quick question. It sounds like, and it's worth asking, but I think I know the answer now based on what you're saying. Is VR and AR, are these the kinds of things that you have learners create their own and turn them in as a project? Are there engines to build it with? I'm thinking maybe AR is easier to do this with VR, or is it the kind of thing that is really very highly technical at this point, and the best thing is to just be a consumer rather than a producer? Does anyone do anything where students actually create?
I would say that to create good experiences, it requires quite a bit of skill, like knowing how to do stuff in Unity and other platforms. I think it's beyond an average type of skill. Yeah. So instead of either us creating or students creating, we have to depend on commercial apps. However, with experiences like 360 videos, which kind of relates to VR, it is possible to do this. And I did have students create 360 experiences based on photography and video technology. But that's not the same as, the VR. Sure. So it is possible, but I would say we still have to rely on commercial products.
What about a colleague? Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, please.
I was just going to ask, what about a colleague that might want to create something? If this colleague of yours wanders into the educational technology unit in the university, will they be thrilled and jumping for joy, or will they scurry and hide because of the breadth and scope of the project?
I do think that's where partnerships, I think, become quite interesting. We have a pretty new here at the University of Illinois, for example, a pretty new game studies program. Part of the game studies program, and I've got to talk to the head of that, part of the game studies program is they've set up a game creation lab. Right? So they're using the sorts of game engines that Regina was just talking about, where honestly, the learning curve is it's like this. It's very high. It's a very high. I've tried to get into it, but it's a high learning curve. But that's where I think language programs need to make partnerships, because sometimes programs like that, they're actively looking for projects for their students to work on. And there was an example that was not quite language focused here. Someone from anthropology got an NSF grant to develop a virtual archaeology lab. That was based in our basement with a bunch of VR headsets. And that whole environment, which is amazing. I think Trisha's been in there. It's really well done. Includes a cave system that they laser scan based on where the archaeologists worked, and a lab outside where the students can process samples all virtually and dig up samples, programmed by one PhD student in computer science. So there are people on campuses like ours, they've got the skills. It's there. It's creating those partnerships. Sadly, I don't quite have one of those yet, but fingers crossed. That would be amazing.
It may just be a question of putting it out there and getting to the right people to make those connections.
Yeah.
But that's a wonderful model too for just collaboration, just generally. If you're running a language resource center and you're looking for outreach into the university and partnerships with other departments and so forth, clearly that's one that's just waiting to be explored, right? So let me ask about the getting back to, okay, so there are learning outcomes and there's a purpose for doing this other than that it's fun and it's cool, right? Of course, we're all on board with that. There should be measurable outcomes. I'm curious about assessment and evaluation for this. How do you assess learners, their progress? Do Do you align it to the 4 skills? Are there some that you're finding or that, is out there in the literature, and what you've heard at conferences, that particular skills might be best served by this? Just
Yeah.
where are we with that? How do you assess? How do you evaluate? What are the positive outcomes that you're seeing?
I don't want to just jump in. I'm waiting for somebody else to jump in first.
I can jump in. This is a big question.
Yeah, I'm kidding.
A very big question. In terms of me personally, I have assessed their performance in VR. And I look specifically at speaking skills and anxiety. So those are kind of my 2 measurements. And I would say in general, again, feel free to disagree with me, but I feel like listening and speaking and cultural skills or cultural knowledge are the things that it's really beneficial for. I don't think writing is there. And initially, I thought reading wasn't there as well, but Regina just gave a talk at Eurocall that actually was showing some promising findings. So that's starting to be explored. But I feel like most of the research so far has been looking at affective factors like anxiety, motivation, engagement, and then looking at speaking skills and, cultural knowledge that can be developed either through like being, in the target country or doing like a telecollaborative exchange in VR.
Mhm. So do you
I
do
think one of the challenges in this field, and it was the same with virtual worlds, is setting up longer term research where you're able to have the possibility to measure changes. And ideally, and this is quite tricky, can you set up a control and experimental group? Because if you do have a control group, you can't just, of course, have the control group. Well, they weren't in VR. This group was in VR, because then how is they got extra stuff? How is that comparable? You need to set up something where the control group is getting something relatively the same, but in the non-VR environment. And with this kind of research, that's not easy to set up. Just in a lot of language programs, they don't necessarily want to do that. Tricia and I are probably going to be doing a follow-up study to one we did last year with a colleague, Melinda Dooley, that took place in Spain, where we were using Immerse to teach groups of 6th grade students in the Barcelona area in a number of different elements that we really work with the teacher to talk about what are the things you'd normally be covering now and how do you want to cover them. So we did set up kind of a modified control experimental group where we split our treatment across the groups. And then, of course, there was it a strike? There was a strike in Spain that destroyed that model. So we weren't able to have that effect. We want to do a follow-up longer term. But even that one was over how many weeks?
I think it was like 10 or 11.
I think it was about 10 weeks, which is a long time actually for a lot of this kind of research. But it's over 10 weeks and meeting once a week, right? So it's not easy to do. But I think that's exactly the reason we need to do more of that kind of research, because it is important, especially if we're asking people to invest in the technology.
Mhm. So, so in some, it sounds like you can look at the learner's experience, what they found positive, negative, challenging, what they learned, how quickly they got used to things, how well they conversed, and so forth. So the affective aspect, and then of course their performance. And you can, I'm gonna imagine you could do measurements before, during, pre, during, and post, that kind of thing.
Well, with these kids, because they're 6th graders, low level language students, we were looking at some specific components of vocabulary acquisition. Again, pegging those to the sorts of things they normally would be covering in their class in the various units that the teacher wanted us to cover. And in theory, we might have had very interesting findings, and if we had not been striked for the study, but we still had some interesting findings.
Yeah, I'm thinking that some of the folks watching this might be thinking, all right, if I want to try to get funding to do this, what are the things that I need to put in the proposal? And, what are the kinds of things I could say I can measure, and then be able to show that I was able to effectively measure
Right.
So I think these are good pointers.
Yeah.
So just as in general, we're going to get to resources in just a second, but just in general, where are we in terms of a maturity level for AR and VR? Is it still kind of brand new and exploratory? Are we getting to I doubt any of you will say, oh, we're at a fully mature field now where it's ready to be its own, its own independent from everything else area. No? What would you say?
Maybe somebody will disagree, but I think we are actually getting there faster than we thought we would be.
I agree.
And that's what Tricia even mentioned a couple of minutes ago, that the equipment gets old very quickly. Why? Because there's new coming, right? And we don't have time for that. But if I were to give you the lecture about the evolution of that type of media, it's doing amazing things. And the main thing what happened, which happened that really sped up everything in that area, is the availability for the masses, right? Before 2000, whatever, 15 or something, there was like nobody could afford that besides some people that had grants or some people in the labs. Now, basically, almost everyone, at least where I'm at, has access to their own headset, and it's actually a nice one. So, and it's moving so fast that I believe that within the next couple of years, it would be almost as usual as having, maybe not a phone, but it would not be something, oh, you have a VR headset, what is this? So I think we are moving the good direction. It doesn't mean that it will necessarily hook up, like, people, of course, we have Meta and all these things. I'm not saying that everybody will start doing everything in VR, and I hope it's not going to be this way, because VR is good for some things, it's not good for others. But I think that there will not be as many obstacles as we had in the past.
Yeah. I mean, if the interesting thing to me, because I love history, and if you look at the history of, I suppose, what we might call VR, you can go back to the 1800s, really, when photography was first taking off, when they had what they called the stereoscopic viewers, which, some of you have seen those, which is a photograph, and then a kind of a sometimes very elegant looking viewer. And then, of course, we had the Viewmasters. I mean, I had those when I was a kid. They were plastic, and you put them up to your eyes, and they came with a little round disc, and again, so you'd see in 3D, so it was more immersive. And VR, as we think of it today, I mean, everybody thinks about it now because Google Cardboard and then everything that came after. But even VR, as we think of it today, it's not new, right? It's been around for decades, but it was out of reach for almost anyone until relatively recently. And I'm 100% with Regina in that respect, that I think what's the rapidity of the advancement of light is pretty amazing, and it makes me wonder where we're going to be in maybe 5 years.
I think now all we need is for the research to catch up with it, because everyone's like, oh, we need to use this, but we don't really have like VR pedagogies and things that are research based and developed. So if anyone wants to join us,
join us.
that was that was part of the gist of the question, right? Is again, thinking about I may want to propose a summer grant or a year-long grant. I'm going to have to show that there is some research, or at least research that says this is the next thing that should be done. Is that, and that was kind of part of the question of, it's not a fully mature field where there's all this is laid out, right? But there's enough groundwork. So I said we would get into resources. So let's do that. So, can you guys share some of the articles that you've read, that you're aware of, research projects that you're aware of? Where are we in terms of the scholarly and the practitioner-oriented studies?
Are we able to do a screen share? Do you know if you're set up for that?
You should have. I didn't think to make you presenters try it, and
no, I'm not, but that's okay. That's okay. One thing I was going to mention, and I think Tricia already mentioned that, and Regina is certainly in there as well. We have, it's one of the only joint SIGs. We have a joint SIG between Calico and Eurocall, and anybody from IELT if you want to join into our SIG, come on down. It's an Immersive Realities SIG. Started out as a virtual world SIG in both groups. Now we kind of wanted to expand our horizons a bit. And we have pretty regular meetings. It was wonderful. There you go. It was pretty wonderful during the pandemic because we were just getting together and exploring stuff, which for teachers, that was great. It was really, and we had a lot of fun too. And we'll keep doing, I think, some things like that. So if you
Yeah,
go to
I'll
the
be
Calico
sending-
website and search for SIGs, virtual worlds, or immersive realities, it'll come up. There you go.
Yeah,
There's
and Jeff, I just put the link in the chat. I know the viewers can't see that, but if you want to, pull it out and give it to them. I'm also popping in here. This is a list that was released on VR apps categorized by subject. So they have anything ranging from like medical, public speaking, anatomy, but there is a language section on there. So if someone's looking for resources, in terms of different apps you could use, that could be a good place to start. In terms of like articles, I will say that LLT and Calico both have special issues on AR and VR coming out this spring. So those will be kind of, little groupings of articles that could be beneficial. They will be more research based.
Yeah.
But
We know
Brandon,
some of the people involved with that issue.
yeah, we do. Brandy and I also wrote a getting started with VR 10 things you need to know. Like little, what was that, an info bite?
Info bite. I'm putting in the link, so again, you'll be able to share that one too.
That one was
totally practitioner focused.
Yeah, no research.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And then Trish and I are, it's done. We're just needing to send it in. We have one where we had a group of current and future language teachers review from a pedagogical standpoint, 6, 7. How many platforms did we end up with? 6 different VR platforms that currently exist. And of course, Regina's had some great stuff.
Yeah, Regina has a ton of articles.
Well, thank you. Maybe not great, but I think our mission, and I believe my mission, I think this whole group our mission is to help us to learn what works and what doesn't in VR, right? And as far as language learning, so with a little bit of patience, once things get published, we welcome people to read and learn something. And as much as I know that IELTS is more practitioner based, but we do need teachers also to share their voices. So I think especially doing some work where researchers meet the teachers and we do studies together, that would be like an ideal way to advance research in that area.
Yeah, and that's another great reason to join that SIG as well, because the SIGs tend to be, especially ours, I think, tend to be very practical in nature. We're looking at things and talking about how we could use them, and we're a friendly group. Anyone's welcome.
And I'm gonna make another shameless plug for the SIG because this fall we'll have 3 events. We're gonna do one like exploration VR, kind of diving in and looking at the platform. I think we're gonna do spatial, because it's compatible on PC and headset. And then we'll also have a talk on AR by someone who's going to come in and talk about how she created the AR system that she used in a study. So it should be more like hands-on. And then we'll also have a VR talk as well. So yeah, join the SIG, and I'll be sending out the newsletter in early September that has like the dates and stuff for that. But
yeah, right. We're going to use the HoloLens, right, for your augmented.
I did, yes.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be this month. I'm not sure if it's still going to come out, but Oculus, again, they're not paying me. Oculus is supposed to be coming out with a new headset they're going to call the Oculus Pro. And as I understand it, to me, it's a bit of the best of both worlds. They'll integrate, right now there's 2 low resolution cameras in front, just so you don't walk into walls. Things become visible if you get too close. As I understand it, their new headset, which of course will be more expensive, is going to be used for VR. But because it will have very high definition cameras in front, you could also use it for augmented reality at the same time. So kind of a 2-for-1, but again, much more expensive. So I plan on getting one at least when they come out, just so I can experiment a little bit. But I'm looking forward to that advancement.
Well, and certainly anything that comes out first will be more expensive, and then, wait a short period of time, and that's periods of time are getting shorter and shorter until the
Yeah.
next version, and suddenly they move into more affordable, things. That's just how it is. If you don't get the very first edition, if you wait a little bit more, it becomes much easier and much more affordable. And as Tricia was suggesting, maybe you don't need 25 of them.
Mm, mm.
I've made all of you co-hosts in case, just in closing, I wanted to ask you for any other final thoughts or recommendations. So if there's anything you want to share, get it ready on your screens, and you'll be able to screen share if you'd like to. So let me just take a moment to thank you now before the final thoughts. Usually I kind of close by thanking and reiterating, but let's do that now in case there's anything you want to prepare to show, and you don't have to. But it's been a wonderful conversation, very exciting, very motivating. We will make sure to put, probably it'll be in the synopsis that we put on the webpage for the FLT Mag. So we'll make sure that those links are available in case you are watching this. As you were pointing out, they're not going to be able to see the chat, but I'll get the links to them. So any last thoughts or recommendations or advice that you'd like to share with colleagues? Just about AR and VR, where to get started, or what to focus on, or just generally advice.
I guess one thing I would say, and I'm sure we would all agree, those who are watching probably as well, pedagogy, right? These are incredible tools, but technology without reason, technology without pedagogy is just a cool toy, right? So think about what you want to accomplish. And I think you have to get in and you have to explore. Maybe at the start, don't explore even thinking, and how am I going to use this for a lesson? Because you just have to explore. Get in there and explore and see what's out there. And then the ideas will come. And what do I want to accomplish if you're using this for a class? What do I normally accomplish? And then, as I always say to my students, does this do something for me that I couldn't do just as well in a regular classroom? If the answer is no, use your regular classroom. But I think there are a lot of things where it can help. And again, I like using them for virtual exchange and that sort of thing to connect with people across the globe. But pedagogy is key.
I would add too, if you're, kind of like overwhelmed and don't know where to get started, look for different workshops. There's a lot of workshops that are like, at a bunch of different conferences, maybe that's not accessible, but even look for online workshops. There's tons that are like how to get started in VR, what platforms to look at. I see free talks all the time, on LinkedIn or advertised through like Calico, IAL, there's the educators in VR group and Facebook. So really like actively look for those, because we've done some of them before, and I feel like they're a great overview of where to get started and how to actually do it.
And SIGs can function in a very similar way to that, right? Because you meet with people who are using it.
Great. Regina, any last, not to put you on the spot, but any other closing thoughts?
They've said so many wonderful things already. I would say one last thing, do not get intimidated. Some people get intimidated because, oh, it's VR. It's not that bad. If us at this age were able to figure things out, anybody can really. And don't get intimidated. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Like, reach to us, for example, if you struggle, if you want to know something more, collaborate with us. Don't be afraid to go to SIG, our SIG, to learn more, to just explore things together, because that's the best way to do it. And just do it.
Regina, don't be
behind.
Did you say at our age?
Yeah, but Regina has a good point with the collaborations, because even with like the headsets, access to students, it's really hard to get enough headsets. So if you can collaborate with people, it helps a lot on the resource side, and it's more enjoyable, let's be real.
Yeah.
Ideal would be also to have some kind of grants, right? That would help us as researchers connect with teachers, get some equipment, and again, advance the research before, I'm sorry to say that, but before all the commercial type of people that push technology because they want to make money, before they make us misunderstand the technology just because they want to sell something. We are not selling things. We are trying to see what works, but sometimes it's easy to get pulled by commercials, and then again, people get biased and they never want to use this because they used it for the roller coaster that I mentioned before. So
there are some, and I think we all know who some of them are, that they just have jumped on the VR gimmick bandwagon, but they don't really use it for any real purpose that couldn't be done on a regular computer. And that's not the way to go, right? It should be for a real reason. I'm not talking about Immerse, by the way, or Immerse Me. Neither of them do that. I think they both do it for a real reason that really adds something to the experience. But there are some that are doing that, and there's no point.
Well, and they've also, happened to, Tricia can attest to this, and her presence attests to it, and also from talking with Scott Cardwell, that, there are pedagogues involved in the development from the ground level all the way through.
Yeah, we have, I mean, at Immerse, we have a research department, and, we're all researchers, but we all have a language education background too. So we're approaching it from both, perspectives. And then we do also have a teaching department. So everything, all of our lessons are aligned to like Common European Frameworks, like standards. It is very thought out, like the company, a big thing for them is to be able to be like, this is based on SLA research and theory.
Yeah, that's great. And one other thought, just to close it out, is your learners may have some headsets already, and because there's this commercial engine driving some of it with the public, so your own learners may be, there may be resources in terms of teaching others how to use it and working with it. If you're a new person, maybe some of your students can help you to get familiar and comfortable, and then you can start to pick out how it works and the affordances and so forth. So great.
Yeah. And I would say if learners already have a headset, one of the great under-examined areas, I think, shameless self-promotion, is informal language learning. Mark Dressman, actually, this was his idea, but I worked with him on this book. And VR, virtual worlds, are the same way. They're a great example of this, that I am a firm believer that nowadays, with our very internet-heavy world, that probably a strong majority of the language learning that's actually happening is not happening in our classrooms. It's happening in this informal language learning environment. So if there are students who already have headsets, they can go into a number of these settings and find people from around the world where they can engage in virtually authentic communication to talk about whatever they want to talk about, and to practice language with speakers of those languages in an avatar that, in my case, looks younger and more handsome than my real avatar. And so, but these opportunities abound. They abound if our students can take advantage of them. And if they don't, they're really missing out on something.
That's just a question of making sure that they know.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. Again, you can find this on the fltmag.com, which is a publication of IALT. And there's a lot of overlap between IALT and Calico, as we were discussing just before we started the interview. So I think, again, the SIG is open to all. The research is out there. These resources will be made available to you. They are available. We'll just guide you to them. So thank you all for opening our eyes to all of this, and to explaining AR and VR in a way that I think is very comprehensible and accessible. All right. I look forward to seeing you in the virtual world and at live conferences.
Well, thank you so much for the invite. This was a good conversation.
So much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much.
All righty, thanks.